Hello everybody. Welcome to this Black Dog Institute webinar. This is the fourth in the series of Settling Your Mind webinars. And it's entitled, as you know, Checking In with Your Mental Health During COVID-19. Before we begin, I'd like to pay our respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all meet, and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. We'd particularly like to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are here with us today. This series of webinars, the Settling the Mind series, has been devised by Black Dog Institute and the researchers at Black Dog Institute to help members of the community to manage the issues that they're facing during COVID-19, particularly during the arduous lockdown that we've been experiencing with COVID-19. So we hope that you derive some value from this practical evidence-based advice that we're able to give you. I'm Jan Orman. I am a general practitioner with a special interest in mental health, and I've been an educator with the Black Dog Institute's professional education team. It says 10 years on the slide, but it's longer than that. With me today, I have Dr. Kathleen O'Moore, who is a clinical psychologist and senior clinical research manager at the Black Dog Institute. Kathleen's areas of interest include common mental health problems like anxiety and depression, and she has a special focus on developing and evaluating digital mental health programs. Thanks for coming, Kathleen.
Thank you, Jan.
We've got a very special guest with us today as well. His name's Wayne Wigham, and he's a lived experience presenter with the Black Dog Institute. Now, Wayne works at a desk quite near mine in the education building, and I don't know, something about Wayne makes it worth coming to work in the mornings. Wayne's got a long history of chronic mental health disorders, and he, in fact, his history also includes being a top rugby league player with the Balmain Tigers in the late 1970s. He scored the most tries in the league in 1980. He asked me not to tell you that, but I'm telling you anyway. You might recognise his face if you're a rugby league fan. And he's been a fireman and a variety of other interesting things in his career. Welcome, Wayne. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Jan. Hey, everybody.
Kathleen, I need you to change the slides if you wouldn't mind. There's the information about Wayne. And what we're going to talk about today is how and why we should make regular checks on our mental health. This is an area of special interest for Kathleen, and Wayne's going to give us some value-added advice from his perspective. Just a little bit of housekeeping first of all. You'll notice that there's a Q&A box that you can access at the bottom of the screen. That's where you can put your questions, which hopefully we'll be able to answer during the course of the webinar. If we don't get to your particular question, there's an email address at the end of the webinar, and you can email us with your questions, but we do hope that we can manage to answer most of the questions you have to ask. At the end of the webinar, up on your screen will pop a feedback sheet. Please help us with our evaluation of these webinars and our efforts to make them as close as possible to what you need by filling in the feedback form at the end. And thirdly, I just want to say, if we stuff things up, please forgive us. We're all working from home and the technology is not necessarily up to speed. So please forgive us if it's not at the level of professionalism that you perhaps can do for yourself. So, Kathleen, here's the burning question. What on earth are we talking about? What do you mean by a mental health check-in?
Thanks, Jan. So I guess when we talk about a mental health check-in, we're really referring to any kind of practice that we do on a regular basis that helps us to consider how we're coping on a day-to-day level. So I think at the core really is the idea that we set aside some time to notice how we're feeling and also to notice whether this has changed recently and maybe even why might this have changed recently.
So, Wayne, do you do that?
Every morning I wake up and I acknowledge that I have non-stop internal chatter, and everyone does. So if you're talking to yourself all the time, don't worry, we all do. But if mine is sending me negative messages and telling me bad things about myself in the morning, then I know that I have to fight back. Yeah, so I do check on my internal messaging that I'm telling myself every day.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to say, Jan, as well, like this will differ from person to person. So some people might be wondering, on the slide we have an example there, which includes more of a formal or structured way that people might check in on their mental health. But other people might want to check in a more relaxed way. You might already be doing it in a more relaxed way. So it's really going to differ from person to person on what works for them.
And should we do it on a daily basis or a weekly basis? What's the best thing to do in order to make this a worthwhile exercise?
Well, I think, again, it's going to depend on the person and their individual circumstances. So as long as you're putting aside some time at regular intervals, so it could be weekly. For some people, especially at the moment, that's just not possible. So it could be every 2 weeks. And then for others, they might be really interested in this type of practice, so they could do it every day. So really, it's important that it's just done at a regular interval so you can notice any changes over time.
One example of this might be those apps that you can use, Kathleen, which allow you to give yourself a score of 1 out of 10 for from 1 to 10 on how you're traveling. And that's a way of doing a mental health check-in, just a simple way that you can do it on your phone.
Yeah, I think we're very lucky with the technology that we have at the moment, especially when we're working from home and at home a lot more. So some people might like to use an app where this is almost automated for you. There's a lot of apps out there and other online programs like My Compass, which we can talk about later. Other people might like to just, set aside a couple of minutes and ask themselves a couple of questions like, how am I going? And has this changed recently? And then, of course, what do I need to do to get my mental health back on track?
And this picture on the slide is a picture of a template that you can do it on if you want to do it in a structured way. Is that right?
That's right. This is just an example. So for people that really don't know how to do a mental health check-in, we thought we'd provide a suggestion. So this is available on the Black Dog Institute website. But again, it's important that you do a mental health check-in in a way that works for you and has meaning for you.
So what's so important about this? Why is it important to see if you're doing okay?
Well, I think for me, it's important because it allows me, sometimes forces me, to set aside some time, regular time, to just focus on how I'm tracking, how I'm feeling. And then I can ask myself, is this changing over time? And if it is, it helps me to make a plan. So that might be something like focusing more on my mental health, like developing a self-care plan, which we will talk about later. And then it could also be getting in touch with a health professional. So normally it's important because, it helps us to check in and make decisions about what we need to do to keep our mind healthy. Yeah.
Wayne, what do you think would happen, Wayne, if you didn't check in on how you were doing every morning, if you didn't have a look at those negative cognitions that you have?
For myself, it can get away from me really quickly. All of a sudden I can find myself a few days sinking into a depression or becoming too self-absorbed. So it's really important for me because if it does get away from me, it's harder to get back to a low number out of 10. So, and the quicker you do get back on top of it, then the less grief you have to go through for me. So it's very important.
There is an interesting question coming from the audience, Kathleen. What happens if you do it too much? Is there such a thing as over-analysing your state of mind?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think the answer, yeah, depends how frequently you're doing it. So there wouldn't really, for instance, be a point to do it multiple times throughout the day. Because if you were, for instance, using a rating scale, of course, you'll notice that that will go up and down and up and down, and you might almost read into it too much. So it's something that we would do maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks. You could do it once a day. So it is important not to do it too much, because then that might lead to other worries or stress as well.
So I guess one of the things about formalising it is that it will control how often you do it. It's a bit like worry time, where you set aside some time to do your worry. It might keep your worry, that keeps your worry under control and contained at a particular time of the day or the week. So maybe doing a formal mental health check-in will stop you from continuing to do it over and over. I think some people are having a bit of trouble seeing what's on their screen. I've had a couple of people say that they are unable to see the speakers or unable to see the screen. We'll get our tech people onto that as soon as we can. So it's clear that doing this may be useful to you if you're a person who doesn't ever look at your screen, look at your mental health, and a person who looks too much at your mental health. So that's the importance of it, obviously. So I guess the next question is what's the best way to go about it?
Yeah, and I think I'll add there, Jan, as well, that it is particularly important at the moment because of COVID-19 and all of the restrictions that we're all dealing with. This is a brand new experience for us. So, a lot of us have had changes in our work and our social and our family environment. So checking in on your mental health is one of those kind of life skills that's good to practice, so that you've got it even once we return to the new normal, I guess, that they're saying. So in terms of how to do a mental health check-in, as we've referenced, this will differ from person to person and their individual circumstances. So we have kind of created a template that you could follow, but you could do it in more of a relaxed way. So for me, I have a 3 and a 1-year-old. So, setting aside regular time can be difficult. I like to do it when I have a morning walk, and then I set aside some time just to ask myself a couple of questions. And really, when we talk about different ways that we can do it, we've provided some suggestions. One of the things that you could do is work through a checklist like this. The first thing that you could ask yourself is, how am I feeling right now? So you could set a reminder on your phone, or you could set a reminder in your calendar just to check in how stressed, anxious, or down you are. So as Jan said, you could use a rating scale, like from 0 to not at all to 10 being extremely. You could create a kind of rating scale that's got a lot of meaning for you. So it could even be something like, I'm doing great, I'm doing okay, I'm kind of so-so, not feeling that great, I'm really struggling. So the reason why a rating scale like that can be good for some people is it can help us to see how our feelings are changing over time. So the other thing that is very important and really kind of gives us wonderful clues on how our mental health is tracking is noticing any tension in your body. So we do know that we can experience physical symptoms that are linked to our mental health. So things like having sweaty palms or a dry mouth or a racing heart, and muscle tension, like things like jaw tightness or other kinds of headaches, even stomach problems, might seem like a physical issue, but they can be a little hint to us to check in on how we're traveling in terms of our mental health.
I want to ask Wayne whether he experiences any physical symptoms when he's not travelling very well from a mental health point of view. Is this something that happens to you, Wayne?
For me, I start to get hot from the inside. I start to feel a heat that seems to be coming within me. So I have a theory that we get given a certain amount of energy to burn every day. And if we don't, it tends to turn back on me. And I know if I burn that energy, then my mental health is much better. I really do get a warning, and I've been dealing this since I was 6. So I'm very aware of my body's feelings. So I really agree with Kath that checking out your body and getting to understand your body and how it reacts with your mind is really important. And you can get to know it really closely.
There are some pretty classic symptoms like sweaty palms and dry mouth and tight jaw and that sort of thing. But there are also other symptoms that are personal to you, customised symptoms that you need to sort of be tuned into and think, aha, yes, that's my anxiety coming on again, or, you know, that's associated with my low mood. So being tuned into your body enough to be able to identify those things is good. Too tuned in, not quite so good.
Yeah, I agree, Jan. I think people store tension and stress in their body in different ways. So if you can get into the practice of noticing where you're storing tension, you will over time really kind of become more aware of tension within your body. Sometimes we're not even aware of it until we get a raging headache and, you know, we can barely function. So checking in regularly with our body helps us to also keep our body healthy, which keeps our mind healthy too. So the other thing that is something that you could look at, of course, is your sleep. So I'm sure a lot of people at the moment are having restless nights. It's pretty normal to have a night where you can't get to sleep. Maybe you've had a stressful day or something has happened. But what is good to ask yourself is, have there been changes in my sleep patterns consistently? So if you notice, for instance, that you're constantly having difficulty getting to sleep, or you're constantly waking up and having problems getting back to sleep, or you might even notice if you're feeling very low or very down that you're sleeping all day and then staying up during the night. So these are the things for us to kind of look out for as clues that we need to prioritize our mental health again.
Most of us are pretty aware that disturbed sleep or changes in our sleep patterns are an indication that we're not doing so well. I think it's significantly less subtle than perhaps the physical changes or the feelings if we're not tuned into them, don't you?
Yes, yeah, I completely agree. And of course, all of these things are linked. So if we're very stressed during the day, we'll hold tension in our body, which will affect our sleep. You know, so these are just different ideas of things that you can check in on regularly, just to kind of give yourself the whole picture of how you might be feeling.
Wayne here in the chat box. Sorry, Kath, I spoke over you. I was conveying a question to Wayne from the chat box, which says, do you find some forms of exercise work better at releasing stress than others? What's your preferred exercise, Wayne?
For me, I have to get a sweat up. So at least 20 minutes, get a sweat up and get my heart rate up. I feel when I get my heart rate up to a certain level, I can actually feel the endorphins fighting against the depression, or I imagine I can, and then I imagine the endorphins winning. But I've also found that a really hot bath, if I can't exercise, to get a sweat up can help, or a sauna or a steam. So for me, it's just a really good sweat, and I find that lifts my mood. And if I can't exercise, hot bath, sauna, steam can help me a little bit to help me get to the next level and work on the other things that Kathleen and you have been talking about.
The really important thing with exercise, and with lots of other things as well, is that it's different for everybody. And just because Wayne has to get a sweat up doesn't mean I have to get a sweat up. Please tell me it doesn't mean that. Kath.
Yeah, well, you know, I completely agree. For me, there's something about walking in the morning and finding somewhere with nature, you know, so for each person, it's going to be different. You can find out what works for you by noticing how you feel after trying different things. So exercise can be something that's very strenuous. I think the recommendations are 30 minutes for around 5 times a week, but that is, again, very general and also, doesn't apply to everyone. So find out what works for you and what makes you feel good. And that's, and just try to schedule it in each week.
I don't want to go off on a tangent around exercise, but I think it's important to say that the recommendations for physical health are much higher than the recommendations for improved mental health.
That's
you really only have to do physical activity to improve your mental health. The more you do, of course, the better, but just a 20-minute walk 3 times a week is probably enough to improve your mental health, as long as it's more than you're doing now. Let's get back on track and talk about checking your thoughts. And I think Wayne's led us into that idea of checking your thoughts as part of your checklist.
Yeah, I think, so looking at your thoughts, some people call this self-talk. It is actually very difficult. People might be surprised, but we're really not aware of what we're thinking a lot of the time. And it's quite a difficult skill to master. But it is important for you to take some time to notice what you're thinking when you're feeling stressed, and how does this affect how you feel. So for instance, when you are not feeling well, you might be worrying about the worst case scenario a lot of the time, or asking, what if this happens? What if that happens? And so it can be quite helpful to even write down your thoughts, or take some time to get more in tune with your thoughts and really have a look at them to notice how they make you feel. So online programs and health professionals can also teach you some skills for working with your thoughts to improve your mood and lower your stress. So that can be things, I guess, like looking at your thoughts and being a bit of a detective, I like to think about it, and asking, is this true? Is this helpful, the way that I'm thinking? Is this a balanced way to think about it? Sometimes it is true, but can I think about this in a more helpful way that will help me long term? Or what would I say to a friend, or what would a supportive friend say to me at the moment about this situation?
It's interesting too, I think, that the negative thoughts that are the ones that you land upon when you're feeling bad evolve over time. They're habitual, and they're often about self-worth, for example, or your usefulness in the community. But over time, they change. So you've got to keep an eye on the changes that are going on in relation to maybe the world around you, and maybe your aging process. It's only been in the last little while that I've been thinking I'm worthless because I'm too old. Before that, it was because I was too fat. I'm sorry, I appear to be being frivolous, but you see what I mean about keeping an eye on that sort of negative self-talk in that way, and being able to identify the changes that occur with it.
Yeah, I think that's right. When you start to try to tune into your thoughts and become aware of them, the really interesting thing is that you will notice that there are certain ones that come up quite regularly and can be pretty awful in terms of our negative self-talk. Yeah, so that's right, Jan. It could be something like, I can't cope, I can't do this. And as you start to kind of track your thoughts or notice your thoughts, you'll see maybe how much certain thoughts pop up, and they're the thoughts that you want to kind of pay attention to and in a way talk back to and challenge.
I think I say very simply for myself that depression is the best liar I've ever come across. So if you are telling yourself non-stop negative thoughts, they're lies. Depression is the best liar, and I grew up around Balmain where there were plenty of liars, but depression makes Balmain boys look honest.
So we can also check in on our reactions and behaviours, can't we? And that's not a bad way to go.
Yeah, that's right, Jan. I think that can be one of the things that we first notice, or other people around us notice, is how we're reacting to stress. So we're all dealing with high levels of stress at the moment because of COVID and the restrictions that have been placed around us. So it won't be surprising if you notice yourself getting more agitated, more frustrated, a bit more snappy, less patient with people. You might notice, on the other hand, that you're becoming more oversensitive or feeling very emotional. So if you have a day like this, you know, we all have bad days, but if you notice that this is happening more and more regularly, it's really out of character for you, maybe even family members are mentioning it to you, providing you some feedback, then that's a really good clue to prioritize your mental health. So it might not be just your reactions to other people, it might also be how you're treating yourself. So we know that when we are dealing with stress, there's different ways that we cope with it. And you might notice an increase in what we would call unhelpful coping strategies. So that might be things like drinking alcohol to excess, communicating by yelling or completely withdrawing. So these are some of the things that you might notice, even things around eating. So you might notice that you're skipping meals or overeating. And if it continues to happen and increase and you feel like you can't manage it, then that is a clue to you that your stress is kind of getting out of control.
Can I ask you, Wayne, just following on from a couple of questions in the chat box, do you write down the results of your check-ins? Do you keep a note of the days that you have too many negative thoughts, or are you familiar enough with it now that you can just run with it in an unwritten form?
Yeah, no, look, I do get very aware when it is overwhelming me, and plus with my flatmates or the people I live with, they're very quick to pick me up. They see me withdrawing, I get a little bit self-absorbed. You spend so much time fighting against the depression that you drift away from everyone else around you. So I can pick that up, but I get a lot of help from those around me who pick it up for me as well.
I know that I find it quite useful to keep written track of what's going on, and many of my patients do too, because you can identify trends. And one of the things that's happened for me over time is that I've learned to pick up changes in my behaviour much earlier than I used to. I used to go for 3 or 4 weeks on a downward path before I'd realise what was happening. And now I can tell after a week that the trend is downward and I need to do something about it. And that's definitely the value of writing it down. You know, just putting your 1 to 10 score on a graph, or doing a proper check-in, a thorough formal check-in on a weekly basis. Whatever way you choose to do it, I think it's good because of that identifying trends and opportunity for early intervention thing.
Yeah, Jan, and I think that's really why checking in with your mental health is so important. So we don't find ourselves really overwhelmed and distressed. That does happen to us sometimes, and we find ourselves very distressed. But if we check in with our mental health, we can kind of intervene or act early when we start to notice that it's declining. And we know that acting early is very important because it can help us turn things around more quickly.
In line with point number 6, Kath, Matt wants to know how your friends help Wayne. What's the effective way to approach you when you're feeling that your mental health is slipping? What's the safe thing for them to do so that you don't lash out like I'm a bit inclined to do? If someone tells me I'm not functioning well, I get cross with them.
Well, we all acknowledge that this is a really hard time that we all are going through. So we have an old fire brigade term, code 10. So when my friends or flatmates see me start to drift away, they just say code 10, because we've agreed that that's a non-offensive way to let me know that I might be going downhill. So that's the way we check in. I don't take offence to it. And they're only letting me know that I'm starting to drift away or withdraw from them and society, and might be spending too much time in my man cave. So really a safe way to do it is find a word that's not offensive, talk about it beforehand, and it's a friendly way to let each other know. Simply worrying about each other. It's just being a good friend.
I think Wayne's made a good point there, Jan, that it's important for your check-in buddy to be someone that is supportive.
Mhm.
You know, because sometimes when we think of who's going to be our person that we kind of stay in touch with, someone that might come to mind might not be the best person. They need to be supportive. You've got to be able to be honest with them. You've got to be able to trust them. So I think that's always really good to think through from the outset.
It's not just that, they need to be someone who doesn't feel totally responsible for your well-being. Just thinking about mothers as being appropriate people to check in with. Sometimes mothers feel guilty when you talk to them about how bad you've been feeling and feel responsible for that. So whilst I don't want to discourage you from talking to your mother, I think maybe it's worth having somebody else as well who has a less, what's the word I'm after, who has a different perspective, a perspective that doesn't mean that they're impinged upon by what you're saying as well.
Yeah, I think someone that can support you and has the capacity to support you, and that after you have check-ins with them, you feel good, you feel better.
I think that's why it's
and
good
maybe.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think that's
no, you go, Wayne.
I think that's why it's good for families or groups of friends to get together to watch things like this, because if you have understanding within your group, then no one can feel guilty because they'll understand that it comes from within ourselves. So it's good to watch this as families or groups, or to educate yourself as a family or as a group of friends together. I've done that with my boys and it's really saved us a lot of grief and been really good for us.
And maybe that implies too that it takes a group of people to look after someone. And maybe we all, every one of us, need a group of people who understand us and have a positive regard for us and will therefore give us appropriate messages, honest messages when they notice things are not right for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think within that group, there's probably someone else struggling as well. So I don't think we'll ever be in a group where we're the only one, or there's not someone else within us that are also understanding from a deeper level.
Well, given that 1 in 5 Australians have a mental health problem every year, there's sure to be somebody in your friendship group who is also struggling with things, particularly at the moment. I think most people are struggling a little bit at the moment.
Yeah, I would agree, Jan, definitely. Yeah.
Well, it's a tough game at the moment, and it is okay to struggle. You can't feel bad if you're struggling. It is a tough game at the moment for anyone. So no shame if you're struggling. You're all brave.
Yes, that's right. I agree, Wayne. And I think when we do come to a point where we notice that we might be struggling and we're not quite sure what to do, there are different things that we can do to help us cope. So one of the things that we thought we would talk about today is just an idea of making a self-care plan. And that really is one way to formally, I guess, look at what you're doing each day and each week to keep your mental health on track and look after yourself. So we have included here again, just like before, a template that we have created at the Black Dog Institute. But you don't have to use this. This is just providing some examples of how you could create a self-care plan. So you can see really when we talk about self-care, sometimes we're thinking about just our body. So that might be eating well and also sleeping well. And as Wayne has said, getting exercise, which we know boosts our mood. But there are a lot of other ways that you can look after yourself each day. So that might be things, you might want to consider things that look after your mind and your emotions, like taking time out and disconnecting from technology is a big one, I think, at the moment. And also, really, what do I do each day to look after my relationships? Do I set aside time for my family and friends? You know, do I plan dates with my partner? And what about my work? How does that help me look after myself? You know, can I engage in some type of meaningful work at the moment, whatever that is? And can I try to have some type of work-life balance? So So that could be a first step if we notice that, you know, we're really struggling and we're not coping, to look at what we do each day in terms of our self-care and come up with some ideas of what we could do.
Kathleen, there are some really interesting questions in the chat box around how to approach somebody else that you can see is struggling when you're struggling yourself.
Yeah.
Particularly if that somebody who is obviously stressed, is lashing out and refusing to communicate with you. I mean, these are really difficult situations that people are describing. We're here actually to talk about looking after yourself today, but these issues around trying to help someone look after themselves, I think, are very challenging and may well be beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. Perhaps we can do another webinar about how to look after other people to the best of our ability. But look, for me, the bottom line is, if you can get them to go and talk to somebody, whether it be your EAP, is that the right acronym? The Employee Assistance Program provider, or a minister of religion, if that's appropriate, or a member of their family, or heaven forbid, their general practitioner, who is at the moment talking to lots of people about this sort of thing. So, you know, I think that's probably the bottom line of helping someone else deal with their difficulties, particularly if you're not managing terribly well yourself.
Yeah, I think it's a very common experience, because when someone around us is really struggling with their mental health, it does have a big impact on us and our own mental health as well. So it can cause us a lot of stress, because we want to be able to help the people that we love and the people that we care for. You know, there is always that saying, you know, that you can't help others until you help yourself. Or I remember someone saying to me, you know, you have to put your oxygen mask on first before you put on someone else's oxygen mask. So it is really important for us to always try and prioritize our mental health, and do that while we are supporting other people, like encouraging them to build up their own network of support, like Jan has said, with a health professional. So I think we were also going to talk today a little bit more about how you cope with stress. So we've kind of spoken we've spoken a little bit about how we have different strategies for how we manage stress. And what you can do as part of a self-care plan is just write down a list of how you deal with stress in your life, and have a look at that list and try to see which one of these practices or activities or strategies are helpful to me. So that might be things that we've spoken about, like exercise and managing your self-talk, or meditation, deep breathing, looking after your body as well. And really importantly, have a look at the way that you cope and see if there's anything that you notice that is unhelpful. So that could be things like yelling a lot in terms of expressing your emotions in a more helpful way, drinking excessive alcohol, withdrawing from others, which is very easy to do at the moment, and we have to all keep an eye on that we don't isolate too much and disconnect from other people. So as part of a self-care plan, we can choose some of our really positive ways or helpful ways that we cope, and plan to increase the way that we use them each day or each week. And that way we can really start to get in the practice of integrating these things into our day-to-day life. The other thing that can be part of a self-care plan is an emergency self-care plan, which I quite like. Some people take a photo of this or keep it in their wallet. So when you find yourself that you're very overwhelmed and stressed, maybe something's happened, you can quickly look at your emergency self-care plan and think, what should I try to do more of right now, and what should I probably stay away from or avoid?
Can I ask you, Wayne, what's on your emergency self-care plan? I think I know some of the answers already from what you've already said, but if you had to name 3 important things that you do when you know you're not coping well, what would they be?
Well, the first thing for me is doing exercise or getting a sweat. That I know for me, that exercise will lift me, even if it's only 5%. That's 5% seems like a whole lot when you're on the floor. And from there, yeah, I really will start to talking to a friend, or if I have to, I will call my GP and I will get referred back to my psychologist or my psychiatrist. So first thing is to try and lift myself up. Second thing is to understand that the messages are lying to me, that depression is lying, telling me bad things to fight back. I force 2 good thoughts in for every bad one, and that really helps. When it tells me bad things, I force good things back. And after lots of practice, my internal self now can scream back at those negative thoughts. But I'm not ashamed to put my hand up for help immediately if I'm beginning to get really, really suicidal or really non-stop depressive thoughts. So first exercise, talk to my friends, put my hand up, but not ashamed to ask for big help if I need to.
And these are important things. And I think that I talk to lots and lots of people about self-soothing activities because I think it's really important that people have a repertoire, and they range from patting the cat to jumping in the bath to getting into bed and putting their head under the pillow to cooking a cake to brushing their hair, you name it. And it's very much horses for courses, but the really important thing is to identify the things that work for you and that are not harmful along the way.
Yeah, I think so, Jan. And, you know, that could even be things like hobbies or learning a new skill, you know, that can provide you with some kind of distraction, but also bring the nervous energy down or help to boost your mood.
Or just look what's happening at the, sorry, Jan, just at the moment, it's, as Kathleen has said, watch out drinking, drugs, but also gambling. If you're gambling to escape, I'm noticing more and more people falling into that. So if you are needing to escape to feel well at all, that is a real, real big, put your hand up and seek help.
Yeah. This is one of my favourite subjects. Tulika's asked how important it is to eat well for your mental health. And I think that the answer is it is extremely important to eat well, to stay away from processed food and sugars and eat as much fresh vegetables and to a lesser extent fruit as you possibly can in your diet. And if that's what people are focusing on during this period of isolation, that is fantastic. The research is coming out increasingly recently about exercise and diet being really important factors in your mental health.
Yeah, I agree, Jan. One of the silver linings, I guess, of you know, the isolation and COVID-19 is having a bit more time to focus on our self-care potentially, and what are we doing to look after ourselves or not doing. Eating a healthy diet is extremely important because the body and the mind are connected. And as you've said, research is really showing the link between the gut and the brain now. So it's important to focus on eating healthy, regular meals, and also look at other things like caffeine and how that might affect your anxiety or stress if you're prone to that as well.
So I have to emphasise the message of how important it is to seek professional help when you need it. The big question around this is, how do you know when you need it? Well, it doesn't matter. If you go along to a health professional and they say, hey, you're okay, you know, if they do the appropriate tests and assess you and say that you're actually not doing too badly under the current circumstances, then that's fine. You haven't wasted their time in any way. I think it's important to have your GP there for support under those circumstances, and your GP is going to be good at making a decision about whether you need further professional help. There are other options too, aren't there, Kathleen?
Yeah, so I think really when we talk about doing a mental health check-in and looking after ourselves, you can do all of these things and still not feel well. So as you've said, Jan, it's very important to speak to your GP and get connected with the right type of health professional for you, and develop some kind of long-term relationship potentially, of where you can check back in with them as well when you're feeling more stressed. So other than seeing a health professional, there are other online programs and apps as well that you can access. And we probably should mention, Jan, I was just thinking as well, that the government is now subsidising seeing a health professional with bulk billed services. So this is really, again, a silver lining out of COVID-19, the recognition that there's going to be a lot of stress, increased stress for people at the moment.
We've run out of time, and I know we haven't addressed every question in the chat box, but you've given us a great idea for another webinar. So watch for the Helping Other People webinar that we hopefully will be able to get up and running. Wayne, your key messages, I guess, are about looking at your thoughts and finding the things that you need to do in order to help yourself. Do you want to expand on that a bit more?
Look, basically, acknowledge the self-dialogue. We all have it. I didn't know that for a long time. I thought I was the only one. If it is negative self-talk all the time, that's a lie. Fight back. No. Force good thoughts in. Acknowledge that this is a tough time. You're not weak if you're struggling. You're brave. It's a great pain if you're suffering depression and anxiety. I'd rather break my legs. You are not weak. Acknowledge you're brave and don't feel bad about it. This is a very tough game we're in. Take one day at a time. Your worst day only lasts 24 hours. So just sometimes you have to go down for the day, go down, start again the next day, be in the moment. Stay in touch with people you trust. That's really, really important. Get on the phone to those. They need you as much as you need them. And that's it. You'll help yourself by helping them. That's good for you. And use your sense of humour. Take the piss out of it, the old Australian thing. Sorry for saying that, but sometimes you just got to laugh at it, because we will be out of this and we will come good and this will end.
Nothing lasts.
Yeah.
I want to point out some resources that might be helpful for you. Black Dog Institute has a special COVID-19 section on the website, where you can find the self-care plan template and the weekly personal mental health check-in template. And there's also a lot of interesting information about mental health and COVID-19 on the website. You can sign up to receive an email that'll alert you to any of the newer things on the website. We also we've mentioned already My Compass, which is an online cognitive behavioural therapy-based program to help you manage the symptoms of psychological distress that you might be experiencing. So spread the word about My Compass. It's free and you don't need a referral for it. We've also got an online clinic. So that's part of the answer to the question of, do I need to see a health professional? Our online clinic provides you anonymously and free of charge with a series of assessment instruments, if you like, so questionnaires that will give you some feedback about how well you're travelling compared with the rest of the world, and will advise you if the results suggest that you need to see a health professional. And of course, the other program to have a look at is the This Way Up set of programs that might be useful to you if you're not quite unwell enough to go and see a mental health professional and you just want to learn a few skills to help you manage your mental health. Thank you very much for coming. Before you go, please fill in the feedback sheet that comes up when we close the Zoom meeting, and make a note of the email address on the top of the slide where you can send us any unanswered questions, queries, comments. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you to Kathleen, thank you to Wayne, and thank you to all of you for coming. The recording of this webinar will be available on the Black Dog Institute website in not too very long. Thanks for coming. Have a good day.